Morning, Kathy.
Great. Yeah.
Good. Got my colors in my office.
I like it. I like it. Right. Gonna see behind me, same thing.
Now, Kathy, I'm not going to go the fact that you picked the Mickey Mouse out of my office and missed all the Gamecock stuff beside.
Exactly.
So is that Gray Collegiate colors, Brian, or is that your alma mater?
It's actually C, neither. I'm a huge Clemson fan, and these are Clemson colors, but Gray Collegiate colors are in front of me, and these two walls are Clemson, so I mixed it up a little bit.
So what are Gray Collegiate's colors?
Black and white.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
You got quite an office, yeah.
That's right. It's cool what you're looking at.
You needed a little color. It's black and white, yeah.
I did too. I had to add something different, so it worked out well. Yes, ma'am.
That's good.
I hope you're doing well. Good.
So Ryan, are we live yet with public?
We are in about 30 seconds.
Okay.
Have everybody on, Laurie?
I'm going through the list right now.
I'm going to mute and be quiet.
I
thought Laurie was on vacation.
There's Chuck.
My pseudo office. I think we've got everybody, Kathy.
Have everybody?
Yep.
All right, we'll get started then.
Laura, what about, oh, never mind. I can't count.
Good? Have everybody? Patrick, good morning. I want to thank you, the task force members, for being here today and for your hard work over the last few weeks on the development of these recommendations for opening schools this fall. Superintendent Spearman, thank you for joining us here today. I know you continue to work diligently with the governor and House and Senate members, our legislative staff members, and Accelerate SC on securing funding for continuous learning for our students and the reopening of our schools. As a proud alumnus, I know Superintendent Spearman is as well. I would like to take a personal moment to recognize that this week is the week for Palmetto Girls State and Palmetto Boys State. And normally, with over 1,500 of our rising high school seniors would be on the campuses of either Presbyterian College or Anderson University to attend these outstanding leadership programs. I want to recognize the 2020 delegates that were chosen for these programs, and that even though they're not meeting in person, they are connecting in many ways virtually. Also, I'd like to recognize that the South Carolina FFA State Convention is this week, and normally we would have approximately 1,000 high school students who are members of the FFA attending, but they are finding ways to connect virtually as well. So hats off to these outstanding young people in our state today. Our task force subcommittees have continued to meet with our advisory groups. We've continued to work on, tended to receive input from Accelerated Ed website and from our stakeholder groups. And I really want to thank all of you who have taken the time to send us emails and express your thoughts. Your input really is invaluable to us. I want to thank the members of the task force and our advisory groups. The State Department of Education staff has worked tirelessly with us to formulate these draft recommendations. So first, I'd like to recognize Superintendent Spearman for her comments.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman, and I would like to say a special thank you to you for the time that you've devoted to this as a labor of love, and to all of the committee members, task force members, and advisory members, as well as the public who have participated with their comments, questions, and that's not over, because I believe your intention, Dr. Coleman, is to give public comment time after this meeting today before the report becomes final. I too, thank you for mentioning Palmetto Girls State, Boys State, and FFA. I participated in Palmetto Girls State long ago in 1971 and was one of your counselors, I think, when you came. But what a wonderful program and leadership program, and I'm missing being there. As well as FFA. I didn't get to be a member of FFA. I was in FHA, which was Future Homemakers. Their girls and boys were segregated at that time, and we could not participate in FFA. But what a wonderful organization, and really a reminder to us on this committee the bottom line. This is all about our students and being able to give them the opportunities in school and extracurricular activities in a safe way, and with the support and help of our teachers and staff at the top consideration. So you're right, those are participating virtually, and we hope that soon we'll be able to be back face-to-face in a very safe environment. So I appreciate all the work. I'm looking forward to hearing the recommendations today. The Reopen South Carolina Senate Committee is meeting as we speak at 10 o'clock. I have been working with them. They will be making their recommendations on how to appropriate the $1.9 billion of CARES funding. They will be making that recommendation to the Senate Finance Committee, completing their recommendations this morning, and then to the Senate Finance Committee next week, and then on to the General Assembly the following week. So all of this should be settled within 2 weeks as far as how things will be funded. Katie Nilgis is over at the Reopen South Carolina meeting representing public education. So I appreciate her work and all of our staff for the extra time that they've given to this effort. And let's get on with the meeting and hear what we've got to discuss today. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Spearman. The next on the agenda is our discussion of the recommendation for opening schools this fall, and I would like each subcommittee chair to give an overview of their subcommittee recommendations. We'll take questions and comments, if there are any, from the task force members, and make notes of any changes that are agreed upon. First in the document are the draft recommendations from the Building and Student Services Subcommittee. So I'll call on Alan Walters to present those. And we do have PowerPoint for you this morning.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Coleman and Superintendent Spearman. The Building and Student Services Subcommittee has been hard at work. There's been numerous meetings, untold numbers of emails have been exchanged, and certainly there's been a lot of consultation, not only with State Department staff, but also an advisory group of experts in teaching and counseling and mental health, special education, nursing, and school facilities. And we want to reiterate, as we've done at every one of these meetings, that these are a snapshot in time. So this is the conditions as of today, and certainly that's subject to change going forward. So I'm sure that even after our final report, there's probably going to wind up being revisions and alterations made at some future date, so that we'll be sure that we're conforming to the latest guidance from such organizations as DHEC and the CDC. The main challenge, of course, is in reopening schools is having students, parents, and staff all believe that it's safe to do so. And so we're reiterating once again that for districts and schools, if you do not have a group in place, a reopening team, task force, whatever title you choose to use, that needs to be done fairly soon. And that team should be made up of school administrators, of staff, parents, especially your PTA and school improvement council members, and then also students where age appropriate. And review the guidance is coming from, there's so many sources of guidance out there right now, but review all of those for every school in South Carolina. Every facility is different. The people who man those facilities are different. And so you've got to make those accommodations for that. Special consideration should be given to activities that aren't in traditional classrooms as well, like band, chorus, art, ROTC, and CTE classes. Consideration needs to be given about who you're going to let in and out of your facilities. For instance, your visitor policy should be checked. It's got to be a communications plan. That is, we can't emphasize that enough. That not only informs your stakeholders, but also allows feedback from them. Certainly, social media platforms are a good way to disseminate information, but we'd also encourage using video showing what your physical facility changes look like before people actually get to the building. And also discussing what the procedures are going to be that are different. And keep in mind that communication should be shared with all parents in their home language so that it can be easily understood. As we said before, this is the next recommendation is one that we think is vital, and that's having a nurse in every school. This will require additional funding for those that don't have a nurse, but also we can foresee a situation where you'll have to have a temporary or substitute nurses because people are going to be out, they're going to be sick. Heaven forbid, if they get the virus, they could be out for an extended period of time. At this point, we're not advocating for permanent hiring. We're mainly looking at the CARES funding for that. However, we believe that going forward, that's going to be something that's going to have to be considered. This is a situation that's not going to go away. In fact, there was a recent survey that was conducted, and even though it didn't include responses from all districts, that preliminary data showed that there are 166 schools and programs in our state that did not have a full-time equivalent nurse. Our next one is one that has evolved through our discussions. It started out is how do we address vacancies in nursing and counselors and such. And one of the things we looked at was suggesting that the General Assembly consider removing the cap on retirement earnings. And we realize there's going to be difficulty in finding significant numbers of school nurses if they adopt the nurse in every school plan, but also school counselors, school psychologists, special education personnel, even teachers, others who provide student services. All of these positions could be difficult to fill because either there'll be vacancies or a need for long-term substitutions. So we're asking the General Assembly to consider removing that cap on earnings for retirees. Next one we have is addressing the shortage of student service providers. The subcommittee foresees an ongoing shortage of these providers based on some of the surveys and recognizing that there's probably going to be more surveys that are needed. So we're recommending consideration of some of the following. First, an alternative pathway for certification of school counselors, additional certification tracks for them. We also looked at possibly having a salary incentive program that could sunset in 3 to 5 years to fill these critical need positions, which would provide more time to find a better permanent funding solution. We think school counseling positions need to be filled and funded pursuant to what the law is. Currently, it's about 1 for every 800 students. The statute says 1 for every 300 students. School psychologists, the caseload recommendation for them, we think there needs to be a requirement made for that. The recommended number for the National Association of School Psychologists is in the range of 500 to 700 to 1. That's in Appendix E of our report. We also recommend that schools and districts review their current state mandated MTSS plans and the results of their self-assessments of that and create a committee that would embed SEL. That committee could identify resources in the district and also how these resources can be combined to provide the best possible program. We still think there's going to be a need for health infrastructure safety grants. We're just going to continue to identify needs. Some of these could be big ticket items. Frankly, a lot of the things that are needed right now just aren't available yet. So even if districts do have funds, they might not be able to find them. But certainly there are going to be some that will struggle with the cost of, for instance, installing plexiglass in offices to create dividers or dividers in the nurses' offices. The HVAC filtering systems, there's all sorts of documentation of things that could be done to that would help improve circulation and reduce the risk of spreading the virus throughout the school. And then creating spaces for telehealth evaluations. One resource we've been able to tap into, and I want to commend them for this, is the South Carolina chapters of the American Institute of Architects and the Association for Learning Environments Both of those are working on offering a series of webinars on how classrooms can be configured, how spaces within buildings can be used to create more distance between students, if there's a way to restructure existing facilities. And we would encourage districts to take advantage of these resources when they come online. Certainly, we have to continue to monitor and develop the cleaning protocols based on the latest DHEC, CDC, and OSHA guidance, and determine if it can be handled by staff, if it needs to be contracted out. And that's part of the funding discussion that's taking place right now. Protocols are good, but they got to be followed. They've got to be, make sure that cleaning and disinfecting takes place, especially those objects that are frequently touched. And then also the products that are being used have to be used pursuant to the manufacturer's instructions. And then we talked about the ventilation, the air exchange rates on that. And we've attached as an appendix to our report some guidelines and checklists from various professional associations that can help in that regard. Some of the actual building considerations that are going to have to be considered, probably first and foremost, is signage. We've got to communicate what these changes are, and it's got to start from the time somebody pulls onto the property, of how we're going to stop the spread and symptoms of it. The instructions should be simple and they should be clear as what actions are required by the person reading them. We're going to have to look at our traffic flow into school, where we can increase areas where students are being received to try to get rid of those bottlenecks in there. It may require staggering entry and release times in order to do that. That in turn may require extending the length of a school day. We need to look at possibly turning off water fountains, providing bottled water, or either allow students and staff to bring bottles from home, maybe have bottle filling stations. We're going to have to look at those traffic patterns like we talked about, and probably put lines in hallways with directions of traffic flow to try to reduce or eliminate as much as we can the two-way traffic through there. This may also require additional time for transition between class periods. Classrooms are going to be problematic because it's going to be difficult to space with 6 feet. And so that's why the current guidance says, to the extent possible, try to have desks in the same direction and as close to 6 feet as possible distance between them. And then areas where we have to have waiting, such as in cafeterias or outside restrooms, we're going to have to mark those floors. And we see it at grocery stores and Walmart and everywhere else, those little X's on the floor to stand while you're waiting in line to keep that social distance in place. And in our cafeterias, the same thing would apply, as well as spaced seating. It may require longer meal periods for that. You could have prepackaged meals. It may be there's a hybrid of that, where half a school has prepackaged meals in the classroom, the other half in the cafeteria. These are all things that will have to be considered at the local level. We also want the agencies that have jurisdiction over our emergency drills, such as active shooter, fire, tornado, earthquake, our shelter-in-place guidelines, to review those and see if modifications need to be made so that that would encompass social distancing and also conform with the latest health guidance that's out there. And so we're asking those state agencies to review that, and if necessary, relax or modify standards, and then send out those revised protocols that would spell out what those accommodations are. We continue to advocate for the state being a part of the state's purchasing power to get the PPE that's needed. I think that's been addressed in the governor's budget as well, in creating a state stockpile. And certainly our education facilities need to have access to that as well. And we're looking at not only face masks, but teachers in particular might need face shields instead, so that students can actually see their faces and not lose that vital aspect of communication that's so important to teaching, especially with our younger children. But any protection that's being worn, of course, is really more toward the person wearing it, protecting them, than it is than protecting others from the wearer. I'm seeing I got that backwards. Is they're intended to protect others from the wearer, but any sort of protection is beneficial. And then the use of masks and other PPE should be determined by school or district policy, which in turn should be based on the latest guidance from DHEC or the CDC. The next item we have is mental health crisis response teams, triage protocol. These need to include school counselors, special education staff, possibly outside agency therapists, teachers, school nurses, and administrators, but they need to be trained in trauma awareness. There needs to be a referral system and resources also for staff for self-care as well. The triage protocol would assist in identifying individuals, that could be staff or students, requiring interventions at various levels. As we mentioned before, that there probably needs to be a needs assessment, and there have been some, there probably needs to be additional ones to make sure that we have the latest needs for school counselors, school psychologists, and social workers, and then looking at those caseloads that we mentioned in our previous recommendation. Next, we had the social emotional check-in and SEL plans. Students are going to need access to ongoing SEL and school-wide programs. This is going to have to be a continuation of the wraparound supports, school meals, access to counseling, and there's a lot of free resources out there. I know the State Department is working on vetting sources, and then guidance should also be provided. We have so many community partnerships out there to support mental and emotional health that we're taking advantage of all of those. We also have to keep in mind our students with disabilities. That's going to be an area where assessment is going to be needed to determine if those services can be provided in compliance with social distancing guidelines, or if there's alternatives that are appropriate that are available. IEP teams are going to be needed to determine, if necessary, how recovery services will be provided for students with disabilities. There could be decisions as to how services will be provided for those who are medically fragile or may not be able to have services provided due to social distancing requirements. If possible, districts should also develop safety protocols to allow potential English learners to be identified using ESSA-approved screening tools, and districts should try to screen students who are provisionally identified during that spring closure. And then finally, this is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart. We would like to see the State Department of the state host a website and create really a sharing website, but ultimately have it to be a center for sharing best practices and ideas related to opening schools. A lot of states have school health and safety resource centers. They're usually formed in conjunction with an Institute of Higher Learning. Texas comes to mind, Kentucky, several of them have those. And those partnerships create or collect best practices, they're able to disseminate them, and also help with continuing ongoing research, because we're always looking at ways that we can better improve our health and safety in our schools. And as I said, we have a number of appendices we've attached to our report that have some best practices, some recommendations, and these are well-known vetted sources, and we hope that these will be beneficial. I want to take my last comment, and that's to thank the members of my subcommittee and also the State Department staff and the advisory group that worked with us. These are just an outstanding group of professionals, and certainly I think going forward, we're going to lean on them some more, but they provided us with a great institutional knowledge of what it's going to take to reopen our schools.
Thank you, Alan, for that report. And you know, one point you made is our resources that we had, and I want to again thank our stakeholders. You know, several groups sent us information. They surveyed their membership, such as the South Carolina School Boards Association, the libraries, the arts, and we were the staff created a resource page for us that our entire task force could pull upon, and we appreciate you know those our certainly our South Carolina associations for giving us the input from their membership, and then we were also there are a lot of information out there nationally that we were able to review also. So our task force has done a lot of due diligence and research, and so thank you for making that point. Next is our instruction subcommittee. I'm gonna ask Patrick Kelly to present those.
Dr. Coleman, before we do instruction, did you want to do any comments or conversations around?
Any comments or questions for Alan? Thank you.
Since I'm unmuted, I have a few I'd just like to offer for conversation. First one is, and Alan and your team, thank you for this report. The first one is around point 1, where you say the main challenge in reopening schools is having students, parents, and staff believe it is safe to do so. I would agree that is a primary challenge, but I think we should be clear that the first challenge is making sure that it's safe. Because I want to make sure that the public is clear that while ultimately it's going to be incumbent on districts to do a good job communicating the steps that have been taken to ensure safety, the first and primary challenge has to be taking those safety steps in the first place. And I know that that is certainly the intent of everything behind this subcommittee report as well as the other two, but I think we need to be clear from the outset that our primary focus and concern and need is to ensure safety. Step 2 is then communicate clearly to the public how those steps have been taken. So I'd offer that as a comment. The second one that I would offer is around evacuation drills. I love that you guys have that folded in. I think that is a critical need because as anyone who's been in a school in the last 5 years knows, there's no such thing as an active shooter drill that complies with social distancing requirements. I would also encourage consideration by the subcommittee that not only should state level officials review those drills to determine the capacity for them to comply with social distancing and other health requirements, but to also evaluate what the impact will be on instructional time for modified evacuation drills. And where my head immediately goes as a high school teacher at a high school of 2,000 students are the every semester bus evacuation drills where we herd kids through the back of a bus. I have no idea how you do that in anything less than over half an instructional day, consistent with social distancing. And if it's going to put an undue burden on instruction when we're so focused on instructional time when we return to school, especially the bus evacuation, I might recommend it even go by the wayside if it can't be done in a way that is conducive to learning. And then the final point, and I think this is something that we're just going to have to hammer through as a task force, is I appreciate that this clearly says the 6 feet distance between desks, because I think that gives guidance to districts to work with. But I also worry about the phrase "to the extent possible," because I think that leaves a lot of wiggle room. And I know why it's there, and it needs. It is.
Let me clarify that, Patrick. The reason it's there is because that's not our phrase. That's the phrase that's used in the current DHEC guidance, the last one we've received. And so that's why I understand it's a soft term, but it's the one that's currently in use.
Gotcha.
And
I appreciate that.
And I would also say, certainly I agree with you about the drills. And if you notice, several of the things we mentioned in there also were incumbent upon possibly having to extend what the length of a day looks like to accommodate it, whether it's drills, moving classes, just going to the restroom and feeding students. All of these things are going to take longer than they used to if we're going to try to comply with social distancing. So it's going to be a work in progress for schools because a lot of this stuff they're not going to know until they actually have to do it in a live setting. And then I also finally want to say I appreciate your remark about the first statement there about the challenge, and maybe we should have been a little more clear. Our thoughts is that we're not going to try to communicate that our schools are safe to the parents until they are in fact safe to do so. So we might need to rephrase that sentence a little bit.
Thanks, Alan.
Excellent comments. Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Alan?
Dr. Coleman?
Yes.
I would like to just ask Alan, and I think they probably discussed this, but I have heard from some teachers who are on the scene in schools, and you know, well, really all grade levels now, because the old traditional way of desks lined up in a row is, you don't see that so often in classrooms. Students are sitting around tables, even couches, and working in small groups. So did you all discuss that as to how that might change rather than just desk all facing in one direction, Alan?
We did, Superintendent. In fact, Chuck Sailors, who's on our committee from Greenville County, they did a study and he shared with us photographs of where they had actually tried to configure classrooms using different types of furnishings to see how that would affect those. Chuck, I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
Well, I think, you know, for certain, if those type pictures, ideas, I know you mentioned the webinars and different resources that are available, but I'm sure we'll spell that out in the narrative as to where folks can go to find those examples of good practices on just really placement of furniture and how to accommodate students within the classroom. So that's good. Thank you.
Kathy, if I could,
Yeah, Chuck?
to follow up on Alan's comment and to answer Molly's question and the comments as well. Alan's correct. The administration in Greenville, in an effort to try to come up with a best practice that could be shared, utilized not only in the district, but shared with others, did take 3 different schools built in 3 different eras with 3 different deliveries of size, if you will, on the classrooms and tried to configure the maximum space utilizing a 36 square foot space per student. It's a challenge, especially with older buildings, because buildings that were built several decades ago, the square footage per classroom is much smaller than what we would see in a more modern building now. So I did share it with Alan and the subcommittee. I believe Alan gave that document, which included photographs and drawings and so forth, to Ryan to include in our information. But I think also, to Alan's point earlier, with the AIA and A4LE, you have there, to Molly's point, a group of professionals both in the design, construction, and school operations professions that can help facilitate a best practice. Quite frankly, it could end up having to be on a case-by-case basis, because what some of the larger school districts have as far as facilities and space within those instructional spaces is different than maybe some of the smaller districts and vice versa. So I hope that answers the question, but we will work proactively to make sure that every district that needs assistance can find it.
Thank you, Chuck. Any other comments or questions?
Kathy, it's Harrison. If I could comment just a second.
Sure.
You know, I think that Alan, sharing from our committee, one of the points being that scheduling especially is going to have to look very different, I'm afraid. And that's going to be run from a lot of outside influences, not just during the day, but with the current guidelines on transportation and use of buses. You know, it's not going to be feasible to leave school schedules the way they currently are. And I think that as we look at things, that's the lens we have to look at everything, is that, number one, things are going to take longer. They're going to be more complicated. But also, I think we've got to hammer home that it's going to cost more. Each of the things that we talk about, we say we realize those have to be done, but there is a cost, whether it be time or financial resources. And, you know, if there was one thing that I think coming out of all this, is that we've got to continue to hammer home things are not going to look the same.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, Harrison. Any other comments? Thank you very much. Alan, thank you for that report and your subcommittee. Next is Patrick on our instruction subcommittee.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. I just want to say a special thank you to LaToya Dixon, Tanya Addison, and Sherry East, my fellow subcommittee members, as well as our advisory group and our talented State Department staff that worked with us. We've met 5 times just to talk about fall recommendations, and like Alan's group, sent more than our capacity of emails. We've also had great conversations with educators, families, community members, professional organizations across the state. And in some cases, we've had video calls with those professional organizations to get their input, which was greatly appreciated. Before I talk about our recommendations, I just want to share the guiding principle that we put at the front of our recommendation set, which is this. In every new school year, schools should place highest priority on teaching and learning. While this should remain a central focus in the fall of 2020, districts must also carefully consider how to best meet the learning needs of students while ensuring the safety and well-being of all students and staff. So our recommendations are structured to give districts guidance on steps they can take between now and the start of the coming school year to ensure the most effective, but also the safest instructional environments for students and the best and safest working conditions for our staff. We acknowledge as a group that these are not perfect solutions because those don't exist in a pandemic. But thousands of students and teachers across this state show that they can make the best out of a tough situation this past spring. And with advanced planning this summer and a commitment to keep safety first, then we are confident that our schools can make the best of the situation this fall, no matter what that might be. It won't be easy, but if there's anyone I have trust in to pull this off, it's the educators of South Carolina. And so we are confident that we can meet the needs of our students this fall while putting their safety first. So our recommendations are broken into 4 different areas. Our first area is our briefest, ensuring student and staff safety, because Alan and Scott's subcommittees did such a phenomenal job with these, but we wanted to lead instruction recommendations with ensuring student and staff safety. So there are 2 parts of ensuring student and staff safety. The first is we are recommending to districts that they immediately or as soon as possible conduct a survey of staff, because while COVID-19 is dangerous for everyone, certain individuals are at heightened risk, whether it's due to age, underlying health conditions, or other factors. As a result, districts need to determine which staff are in those heightened risk categories. This is not an easy thing to do, and it should be done in line with applicable laws on confidentiality and personally identifiable information. But districts need to have this information to start planning now, to know which staff are in a higher risk category or are caring for an individual and living with an individual that's in a higher risk category. And that's a new element of planning that districts are going to need to consider. We also recommend that districts start preparing for the social and emotional needs of their staff in the fall, because just like our students, staff have experienced their own version of trauma over the last 3 months, just like every member of our society. And so districts need to have easily accessible resources for staff, starting with EAPs that most district insurance plans cover, but looking at other additional resources that we can provide to meet the social and emotional needs of our staff as they return to work, in whatever format that may be. Our second step is preparing for opening. So it's a lot around summer work that districts need to conduct in order to be ready to hit the ground in the fall. This is a unique challenge because of the unique challenges posed by COVID-19 for quote unquote normal school operations. And it's going to require districts to adjust their ordinary traditional planning routines for the start of a school year. To best prepare for instruction in the fall, districts need to take several important steps this summer, including the ones you see on the screen. The first one we've talked about at length with our summer recommendations, but we thought it merited continued reference in our fall recommendations, that districts and the state must address the digital divide that our students face. Over 100,000 students without access to broadband or devices at home. We have to get in front of that going into the fall. The second thing districts need to be planning for, and I'll be brief on this because Scott's report also touches on this, but staff are going to need some additional training coming into the fall, specifically around new safety protocols and procedures related to reducing the spread of COVID-19, whether that's identifying symptoms, whether that's new procedures the school has put in place in terms of sanitation. Probably going to need new training depending on the district around accessing basic operations of new computer systems and processes that districts may be implementing to better prepare for possible distance learning formats. In conducting this training, though, we encourage districts to follow two guiding principles. Number one, that they should be delivered in the most efficient manner possible to reduce time burden on staff. And secondly, districts should evaluate existing annual training to see what can be streamlined or eliminated in order to increase capacity to focus on COVID-19 related needs in the fall. Of course, there are certain trainings that we are required legally to conduct every single year. But districts should at least evaluate what they're already doing to see what can be cleared off the plate to increase focus on new requirements from COVID. The third thing is professional learning. We talked about this in our summer recs as well. Our guiding principles here are for districts to provide relevant, ongoing, sustained, and collaborative professional learning opportunities. We also have given additional guidance to districts to try to prioritize in-house professional learning over travel, both due to cost, as Scott's report will talk about in terms of being conservative with budgeting, but also to minimize exposure of staff to other areas of the country that may be experiencing higher levels of COVID-19. And we also encourage districts to build their capacity of building level experts in the areas of distance learning and related topics. In particular, turning to those who led and facilitated instruction in the spring of 2020 because of the expertise that they have gleaned over the last 3 months. In terms of the topics for professional learning, it is similar to our summer recs. We want districts and encourage districts to focus on what is most relevant and needed. That doesn't mean that other topics in professional learning aren't important. They are, but right now we have to prioritize and address the immediate and novel challenges presented by this virus. Those kind of topics include distance learning. And we need to be clear, and I'm going to borrow a phrase from a teaching colleague of mine, so I'm giving her credit for this. But she is very clear that what we did over the last 3 months really wasn't distance learning so much as it was emergency deployed instruction. And I think she's right, because we couldn't get in front. We were just trying to triage and do the best we could. That can't be the case in the fall. We've got time to plan now, and distance learning effectively is going to look differently than what we pulled off in the spring because we've got the time to get ready for it. Second topic is MTSS. Of course, districts are already focused on this, but there's going to be a need to focus on Tier 1 interventions and trauma-informed practices for students because this pandemic's not going to be over in the fall, and the effects of the pandemic are guaranteed not to be over regardless of the health condition. We also are advising professional learning around effective communication and building school-home relationships, kind of hedging against the possibility of distance learning. So we need to be better prepared to engage our families. And finally, we are encouraging districts to set aside time in the summer and moving into the fall to give teachers time to collaborate over the implementation of the learning progressions and essential readiness standards the State Department are developing. The State Department's developing these learning progressions in acknowledgement of the fact that teachers in the coming school year should not try to teach 100% of the standards for their current course and 25% of the standards for last year's course. It's just not feasible. So the State Department is helping provide guidance, but teachers need time to unpackage that guidance in a collaborative setting with their colleagues to inform their instruction. Teachers can move mountains if they're given time and space and collaborative opportunities, but they're going to need that. The fourth thing for preparing for opening is completion of student evaluations, and Alan alluded to this. So I'll just simply note, in particular, we're talking about in progress evaluations for special education status under IDEA and in status evaluations for English language learner status under ESSA. Fifth, you see we have communication plans. And the first three are pretty straightforward and explanatory. Districts need to be ready to effectively communicate procedures and safety protocols, as Alan's group alluded to. Districts need to get in front of thinking about the way they're going to communicate their back to school events for the fall, because it's not going to look like it always has. Districts need to establish two-way communications opportunities to create a feedback loop where the community can provide feedback to inform district operations. The fourth one is the most important one, and that is distance learning contingency plans. even if we can open quote unquote normally in the fall, we have to be prepared for the contingency of a resurgence of COVID-19 that requires extended periods of school closures, either locally or statewide. And while no one could have foreseen it in the spring of 2020, we can't be caught off guard again, and districts need to build plans now. So we got to enter the fall with a distance learning contingency plan in the form of a handbook or other resource that's accessible to all. And we have documented in our recommendations several things that should be included. And I'll briefly touch on them, but not go in depth. Number one is expectations for daily schedules for student learning in the event of distance learning. That includes expectations on hours of engagement and district level collaboration and coordination to prevent scheduling of synchronous instruction at the same time for students across different grade levels, so that family broadband can hopefully manage it. Secondly, we want clear tutorials for families on how to access distance learning platforms. Third, plans for those without digital access and for grade levels, especially our younger learners, where best practices in distance learning aren't necessarily 100% technology based. We know for our youngest learners, distance learning most effectively often means something like play kits and not screen time. We also think the distance learning contingency plan should have expectations for frequency and format of communication to families and students by schools, expectations for when work and materials are posted for students, expectations for due dates and timelines for student work, expectations for tracking student engagement and quote unquote attendance, expectations for grading and feedback to students, contingency plans for IEP teams, plans for providing substitute instruction in the event a teacher becomes ill, plans for how to resume in-person school operations after a period of distance learning, and plans for working with institutes of higher education for high school students that are in dual enrollment courses. So that's a pretty robust section of our recommendations, because we want to make sure that South Carolina schools in the fall are ready for a potential resurgence, so that we're playing from in front instead of behind like we were in the spring. And then our final step here is supporting our educator prep programs. As both Alan and Scott's subcommittees point out, districts are going to have to reevaluate their visitation policies in the fall, but those visitation policies should take into account the critical nature of our partnerships with educator preparation programs in this state, because research shows that field-based clinical experiences are essential to effective educator prep. We need our student teachers to be able to access those clinical experiences so that this current crisis doesn't boil into a 4, 5, 10-year crisis, because we have an entire generation of future teachers that didn't get full preparation experience that they need. So we've given several recommendations there about how districts could go about making that happen. And then the final thing on the next slide around preparing for opening is probably the one that is most novel and most difficult for districts, but we think it's important, and that is determining student attendance in the fall. Regardless of the rate of community spread in the fall, the reality is that some students will either not be able to return to in-person instruction in the fall, or their families will be unwilling to send them, and this situation is likely to persist until there's an effective treatment or a vaccine for COVID-19. This has been shown in multiple polls of parents. We referenced a USA Today poll that found that nearly 30% of parents nationally are very likely to choose home instruction in the fall. And USA Today also noted that 20% of teachers are hesitant to return to in-person workplace in the fall. As a result, districts have to plan now for how to meet the learning needs of students that may not return to in-person instruction in the fall due to COVID-19. So to do so, our subcommittee has laid out 4 key steps for planning for that possibility. Number one, districts should immediately conduct a survey of families to determine, and many districts have already done this, I should note, but for those that haven't, a survey to first provide the community with an update on current planning for the fall, even if it's just to let them know that a plan is being developed and a task force is in place locally. But secondly, and most importantly, to ask families for their thoughts at this time about sending their child back to school in the fall for in-person instruction. Now, we think the survey should be anonymous, and it should provide families a chance to indicate that their decision is influenced by COVID-19 risk factors for the student or for family members or caregivers. It should be clear this is not a declaration of intent, because a lot can change in the next 2 months, and hopefully a lot changes for the positive. but districts can't, hope's not a strategy, to quote somebody from a prior task force meeting. We need to know as much as we can right now to plan effectively. Secondly, districts need to work with the State Department, with their local school board, and with the State School Boards Association to start developing a distance learning access policy. And we are looking at this in many ways as a concept similar to the eligibility requirements for homebound. So districts develop a clear policy around what would qualify a student for distance learning access as a result of COVID-19 related complications. Third, districts need to plan for potential fall distance learning groups, and this can be informed by that initial survey. And this is necessary even in the event that we go back to quote unquote full traditional operation in the fall. Districts need to determine how to meet the needs of students based on their survey projections. And it's imperative that in this planning that districts avoid situations where teachers are required to plan and implement instruction for students via in-person and distance settings during the same day. And so we have laid out several options for districts to look at for how they could achieve that, whether it's using existing resources like Virtual SC, whether it's creating distance learning sections in their master schedule, ideally taught by those staff members that are at higher risk due to COVID. Could be live streaming of classes. And we have also built in recommendations for sharing across districts in acknowledgement of smaller districts that simply don't have the staffing numbers to make that easier feasible. And we've talked about asynchronous learning resources as well. And then the final point here is a declaration of intent. By late July, districts should have guidelines in place for determining student eligibility for distance learning as a result of COVID. At that point, families should have an opportunity to apply for distance learning access. Districts must communicate their plans for the fall, including the way distance learning will be conducted, so that families can make informed decisions. The application deadline should be set sufficiently far enough in advance to enable schools to adjust master schedules accordingly. And once a student is approved for distance learning, we're recommending that the student cannot return to in-person instruction unless and until space is available in an instruction class. So this is in effect almost a registration process. And we know that that's going to require a lot of thought on the part of districts and school boards and attorneys and the State Department, but we think that this is essential to be able to effectively plan for and conduct effective instruction in the fall. Step 3 for us is resuming and extending learning. And this is our subcommittee's attempt to address some of the CARES Act funding that Accelerate SC has approved and that the General Assembly is currently looking at. So this is something that appears that it is going to make it through the General Assembly, but they still obviously are working on this and will vote on it when they come back in a few weeks. But we wanted to provide recommendations in the eventuality and possibility that the General Assembly appropriates these funds. The first thing is what we're calling LEAP days, which are the extra 5 days that lots of people have talked about recently, and the governor referenced yesterday in his press conference. These days have been included in the Accelerate SC recommendations and would provide sufficient funding to cover full school operations in grades K through 4 through 8, including full salary for staff at their contracted daily rate of pay. Pending final approval by the General Assembly, these are our recommendations for those days. Number 1, in terms of placement on the calendar, that would be at district discretion, could be before the traditional teacher in-service week to start the school year, or it could be after, but it has to occur in 2020 because it is being funded by federal funds that must be expended by December 30th, 2020. Secondly, in terms of which students are involved, we're recommending that districts should not be required to require all 4K through 8 students to be present for all days. That districts should have flexibility here to use the days in the way that they deem most effective based on local context. So districts could stagger student attendance based on locally identified needs. And in doing so, we've recommended 4 key activities that can happen during these 5 days: learning, evaluation, analysis, and prep, which is where LEAP comes from. In terms of learning, this is to revisit prior content and skills. And I want to be clear, our recommendations are not intended to catch up students from all instruction missed in the spring. That's not possible. Teachers are miracle workers, but they're not turning 5-day extra days at the start of the year into 45 days of missed in-person instruction. But teachers are also exceptional and can get a head start on the year with those 5 days, especially with students that are identified by a local district as being most at need for remediation. So the efforts here are focused on increasing student learning, not on recapturing lost time. Evaluation these days could be used to conduct diagnostic activities using tools already selected by the district. It could be existing tools that are in heavy use like KRA, MAP, or MTSS screening tools, with the idea being that these 5 days could enable districts to have the data necessary for teachers to inform instruction when we come back for the full 180 days. The third is analysis. This is to give teachers time to collaboratively engage in data analysis. It's not enough just for us to gather data and evaluate student needs. Teachers need time to unpack that data, both from last year and from LEAP days. And this also could include a chance for review of IEPs to determine a need for supplemental services. And then finally, under preparation, this could be social and emotional needs of students. So it could be closure. An elementary school student could get closure with last year's teacher before meeting this year's teacher. So it could be around building relationships. It also could be around establishing routines and procedures, most of which will be, or many of which will be new in the fall, but to do the things necessary to establish the best possible conditions for learning at the start of the normal school year so that we can hit the ground running. The other recommendation here is around extended learning. Districts may have sufficient federal recovery funding through CARES or other streams, or districts may have funds that they carried forward from title programs from 2019, 2020 that could fund extended learning opportunities for targeted interventions in literacy and math for students. That could include extended school days and the associated costs for staffing. It could be targeted before and after school programs, double blocking of students, Saturday learning opportunities, or looping of students at lower grade levels. So those are our recommendations around resuming and extended learning. And then our final step is structuring and scheduling learning. And this is the one that has been probably gotten the most attention around the country. How do you schedule learning in a world of COVID? Scheduling for the coming school year poses unique challenges that we've never faced. Schools are faced with the task of building schedules aligned to best practice and research on student learning while also adhering to new health and safety protocols. This task is also complicated, as Alan noted, by the impossibility of projecting with certainty the health conditions in August. But we have to plan accordingly. And as a result of these factors, this section of our recommendations provides a menu of 3 potential scheduling models for districts to consider. In order to provide as much clarity as possible for students, families, and staff, we're recommending that districts should seek to provide an update and overview of scheduling plans to their community no later than 20 days in advance of the scheduled first day of their 2020-21 school year. Districts can and should communicate that plans can and likely will change as new information becomes available, but this July date will help the community with planning for the fall. In terms of general recommendations for scheduling, regardless of which model is selected by a district, we believe these 5 things should be incorporated into scheduling considerations for the fall. Number 1, districts should evaluate their existing calendar. Just because you voted for it in the spring doesn't mean that it has to be the same in the fall. Some districts have talked about moving back their start date until after Labor Day. If local conditions, health conditions make that look like it would be a good choice, districts should make that step. Districts, for some reason, feel they need to go earlier than the 3rd Monday in August. They should seek a waiver from the State Department, but they should look at their calendar. They should also look at potential new calendar models, like year-round scheduling that provides for extended breaks at the end of a 9-week period. An extended winter break period, like some of our state universities are trying to do based on the high possibility of resurgence in the winter months. But any calendar change needs to be clearly communicated to the community and give the community chances for input, especially to analyze the impact of changes on potential resources like childcare. Secondly, we're recommending that districts schedule distance learning practice days in advance. So even if we come back fully open in August, Districts need to build into their calendar 1 or 2 distance learning practice days in the first 9 weeks, in effect, a trial run. Research has shown that these types of test runs in other countries that have experienced pandemics can have positive consequences for student learning in the event of a full implementation of a distance learning plan. Third, we've given recommendations to districts around grading practices because students will be entering this school year after experiencing a disruption to 1/4 of last school year. As a result, districts need to reevaluate grading practices to utilize policies best aligned to promote student remediation, growth, and mastery of content and skills. Priority in grading should be placed on utilization of practices that don't simply seek to quantify learning. Instead, grading practices that seek to promote and drive learning. And so we've made recommendations for consideration such as increased reliance on formative assessment, greater use of mastery learning, providing student choice, greater reliance on authentic assessment practices, standards-based grading, and the elimination of term weighting at the middle and high levels. It should be noted these types of grading practices are consistent with the increased focus on instructional time and learning that underlied our summer recommendation for the State Department to seek waivers from federal and state testing requirements for the coming school year. Fourth, we make a recommendation that districts have a plan in place for the potential advent of new bullying and harassment as a result of COVID. Because we acknowledge that there is a likelihood that bullying could occur of students that have contacted COVID or family members have done so. Accusations or taunting of students about alleged COVID exposure, taunting harassment against students that utilize additional protective measures in school, whether it's face masks or avoiding close physical proximity, or threats by students or staff to expose peers or staff to COVID, regardless of whether the threat has substance. People will be on edge in the fall, and we need districts to be out front in articulating what is acceptable behavior in the midst of a pandemic. And then finally, we recommend that districts take steps to ensure a well-rounded education. As our state learned in the spring, certain courses and contents face unique challenges for delivery solely via distance learning. These same courses are likely to be the ones that face the greatest instructional challenges due to new health and safety requirements like social distancing or wearing of masks. However, in spite of these challenges, it is unanimously the recommendation of our subcommittee that districts continue to ensure students have access to a well-rounded education in both in-person and distance learning environments in the fall. These courses are an essential component of the world-class education identified in the Profile of the SC Graduate, and access to these courses has documented benefits for the social and emotional wellness of students. As a result, our recommendations include information to help provide guidance to districts on ways to ensure students have access to instruction in areas such as the arts, health, ROTC, career and technical education, and media centers. These recommendations have been and are being built in collaboration with professional organizations for these content areas, and we thank those groups for their input and leadership in this area. And then finally, selecting a scheduling model. Ultimately, districts are going to have to choose what does the schedule look like in the fall, and that's going to be an inherently localized decision based on facilities, staffing, and most importantly, local health conditions. So we've provided 3 guiding principles to districts as they are seeking to determine which scheduling model to choose. And you can see them on the screen. Number 1, making sure that greatest priority is given to safety and health. Number 2, avoiding a scheduling scenario where the burden falls on a classroom teacher to simultaneously create and implement traditional and distance learning for the same students at the same time. And 3, while we would love for everyone to be in person, because that's optimal, districts and schools should have plans in place to adjust accordingly their scheduling models in the event of a resurgence of COVID-19. With those 3 guiding principles in place, we provide guidance on 3 models. The first is a traditional model, but we have traditional in quotes because we don't think school can look the same in the fall, as Alan noted. This would be based on low or no spread of COVID in a local area as identified by DHEC and local health authorities. It allows for in-person instruction for all students, but it can't be business as normal. So we have included recommendations for what that would look like in terms of increased needs for communications to families, how to achieve class size caps that are a result of facility limitations like a 6-foot spacing between desks, And that won't be easy. We're not under the illusion it'll be easy. But again, we're guided by the principle that greatest priority is given to the health, safety, and wellness of students. We have recommendations for plans for class coverage to make sure that students are not sprinkled in the event of a shortage of subs, which would in turn, of course, violate social distancing restrictions. We have recommendations for reducing transitions during the day to try to keep kids with as little exposure to others as possible. We recommended a modified high school day for students that are at or have exceeded 24 credit hours to use greater access to virtual learning to try to diminish on-campus numbers. And we have recommendations for plans for self-isolation periods that staff or students would have to engage in as a result of exposure to someone with COVID. Scheduling model 2 is a hybrid model, which would be a result of medium spread of COVID or because schools lack sufficient facility space to maintain health guidelines with 100% of students on campus. In this event, districts should give highest priority to in-person instruction for 4 groups of students: our youngest learners in pre-K and elementary, our students with IEPs, our English language learners, and high school students in CTE programs that require hands-on experience with specified equipment. We have given possible models that districts could look at, whether that's AM, PM, or alternate days. But to aid in that selection, we have provided 5 questions for districts to consider that you can see on the screen around communications, local childcare capacity, the effect on student subgroups of a modified schedule, minimizing burdens on families, and the challenges of building relationships when not all students are on campus. And our final model is full distance learning, which would be a situation where because of high spread of COVID in the area in the fall, no one can return to on-campus instruction. In this event, districts should implement their distance learning contingency plan. And since this is occurring at the start of the year, instead of in the middle of the year, we added a few additional points for districts to consider beyond their contingency plan in the areas of building relationships with students, considering development of advisory groups to utilize all staff in order to ensure that students have someone engaged in tier 1 interventions, both academically and social and emotionally. Two-way communications, again, the need for feedback loops from the community. Districts setting up technology assistance hubs or mobile capacity to meet the technology needs of students. Meeting the needs of special populations. We talk about the unique challenges faced by our IEP students and English language learners. And then finally, we reinforce our summer recommendation for the State Department to provide waivers to define minimum program and seat time requirements in the event of full distance learning. So that is the totality of our recommendations. I tried to be brief, but as my students will tell you, I'm terrible at it. So if any of my other subcommittee members have anything to add, or if there's questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Patrick, I just want to say thank you for your leadership in this work. It's been a pleasure to work with you as well as Tanya and Sherry. But I wanted to make one clarifying comment around the last 2 points you made with the full distance learning model around waiving defined minimum program requirements and seat time requirements. I think given the fact that while much of what is going to happen in the fall is uncertain, we do know for certain that things are going to look different. So I'm of the belief that regardless of what model districts might choose, whether it be hybrid, whether it be in person, or whether it be a full distance learning model, I hope, Superintendent Spearman, that you will seriously consider asking the State Board and the General Assembly to waive defined minimum program requirements as well as seat time requirements. And if the United States Department of Education allows standardized testing requirements. In our traditional testing sense, I'm not sure that the results would have very much meaning to us because of how different school is going to be. But I am certain that teachers are going to make sure that students learn and that we can see that from things like demonstration of mastery that Patrick mentioned. So I think that would be a welcome relief to educators and to teachers and even to our students who have been tested, all their tiny lives and careers. So those are 3 very important things that I wanted to just emphasize regardless of which learning model occurs. Thank you.
Dr. Coleman, thank you, Patrick. outstanding report and recommendation. Dr. Dixon, thank you for reminding us of the things that we need to do in the next fall, not just to make school safe, but to relieve some of the anxiety. I certainly agree with that. And we'll be moving forward as we work with other states to take as many burdens off of our teachers and students as possible. So thank you for that reminder. And I feel moved to say this as well, Patrick and others, while you've been presenting, just the reminder that while the COVID-19 has been a tremendous traumatic event for all of us, our students have also, and faculty and communities have had another traumatic event to happen with the death of George Floyd and the racial tension that's been brought forth. And as educators, it is our responsibility, and I feel so committed to making change, to having discussions with our students. In some ways, it's good that they've not been in school during this time, but in other ways, it's very sad because we've not been able to talk with them and support them and give them the dialogue that they need to show them that we care. And I am very happy, and I had really not thought about it until you were presenting, Patrick, but those extra 5 days that we're talking about and this push for more conversations with students about their social emotional status and how school educators can support them, it's really, that's going to be a blessing to have that time that we can spend with our students. So that's a whole other issue that almost needs its own task force. But I want you to know I'm committed to making change and having those discussions, as I know our superintendents and teachers are as well. But it just brought to mind to me while you were reporting of how important those additional days and the additional support of counselors and talking with students about their social and emotional needs will be as we go back to school in the fall.
Thank you, Superintendent Spearman. Any other comments from the subcommittee?
Kathy, this is Ryan. I just want to mention one thing regarding the low, medium, and high levels of spread that Patrick touched on. I think are going to be recurring throughout the next presentation as well. As our agency and DHEC works together on some state level protocols for schools to follow, in the event a student or a staff member or a close family member test positive for COVID-19, we would I think the department just needs a bit of discretion in putting together a differentiated system that can follow those scheduling models, but may look just a bit different. DHEC may want 2 different levels, or they may want 5. So I just don't want to pigeonhole us to 3 succinct areas, but I definitely think a differentiated system that includes the things that Patrick has mentioned and the ones I believe Scott is going to cover up next. So I don't want us to be married to those 3 when we work with our state public health officials to really get their feedback on this.
Excellent point. Thank you for that, Ryan. And I just want to say, Patrick, in your beginning when you talked about our teachers, I want to echo that and say that our teachers performed amazingly this spring, and that you're right. Given the opportunity, I put our South Carolina teachers would definitely be up to the task. So thank you for reiterating that. Comments from the subcommittee. Not, I'll open it up to any other comments from the task force.
Kathy, if I could just say one thing. I do want to thank Patrick for his leadership, as well as the other team members for their service recommendations. But I would like to say to our educators, our parents, and our students that are watching, we are in uncharted times, and these recommendations, they are due to the pandemic that we're in. It's going to be essential as we approach the next school year in the fall that we all work together to ensure that our students are safe and to ensure that they all achieve the learning that's desired. So it's going to be critical for all of us to work together. And I do want to let our parents and our students know that there's no plan that's perfect. And to our educators, we are thinking everything that's possible. The recommendations will go out for review, and we are looking forward to those comments so that we can adjust them accordingly. But when we do approach the fall, flexibility is going to be essential, and education will look different than it has in the past.
Thank you, Tanya. Excellent comments. Any other comments?
Hi, everybody. It's Sherry East. Can y'all hear me? Hello? Okay, just checking there. Appreciate our team. Patrick did a great job. Our team did a lot of work. And I will have to echo on LaToya's testing. You know, when the feds open up, if we can get a testing waiver, I think we've talked about the loss of instruction and how to get as much instruction time back next year as we can. But I think there's been research out there about 30% of our time is spent testing or pre-testing or all that good stuff with testing. If we could get away from that next year, that would really, really help, I think, with our content. And just kind of echoing what Tanya said too, everybody wants a plan. Teachers are the rule followers. We want to know what to do, and nobody can tell anybody what to do right now because it's just, you know, we've never been here before. But hats off to everybody on this team and the State Department and everybody that's been part of this. Everybody, I think, will, you know, just are going to be okay. But I appreciate everybody's comments and putting forth all this effort. Thanks.
Thank you, Sherry. Appreciate those comments. And no other one. We'll move on then to our Administration Operations Subcommittee chaired by Scott Turner. Scott?
I think I'm unmuted. Thank you, Dr. Coleman, Superintendent Spearman. I would also like to thank the members of our subcommittee, Missy Campbell, Sherry Eppelsheimer, and Brian Newsome, along with our advisory committee members, and also the members and folks at the State Department of Education who walked along with us in this journey. As most of you know, South Carolina is not the only state who is working on this issue. It is a national issue, actually an international issue. And so a lot of the recommendations that we pulled from were actually recommendations that other states have already put out ahead of South Carolina. We leaned heavily on Indiana, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, looking at their models of what they've put out, recommendations they've made, and I think that'll be cited when our full report is made public later this afternoon, I believe we said. In terms of the Administration and Operations Subcommittee report, first of all, on school opening or reopening, it will be based, I think what Patrick said, it will be a continuum of options, including on-campus, face-to-face instruction, and remote learning, depending on the level of COVID-19 community spread. That model is based on Georgia's model, and we use those terms low spread, medium spread, and high spread. But as Brian said, we're going to lean on the State Department of Education and DHEC to collaborate on differentiating that model of COVID spread in our school districts. And then we will obviously lean on them for help and guidance in what level of operation we will be in based on that community spread. Right now, we don't have definitions of that amount of spread in our state. And I believe DHEC is working on that. I was told that they were working on that within their own task force. The next thing was operation level should include fully open and operational in-person instruction and social distancing, hybrid operations with modified schedules, and fully closed with all students served through distance learning. Again, all those are depending on the level of spread of COVID-19 within a community. So some of our districts may be fully open and operational if they have low to no spread. Some districts may be closed if they may be a hot spot at the moment. And I'm going to get to transportation in just a second, which is literally the driving force, probably will be the driving force on which of these we open with in the fall. The last point on that slide is that each district should consult with relevant stakeholders, going back to what Alan said and Patrick. Each district should probably, we recommend, create a task force within their district made up of board members, district and school leadership, teachers, parents, students, and community members. We also recommend that they seek legal counsel in the decisions that they make, and also check in with their liability insurance carriers when making decisions impacting attendance for employees and students and other operational decisions that they may make. In terms of plans, we think you should begin with a communication plan. And then coming out of that task force is a communication campaign for your communities, your families, and your students and employees, so that they understand the environment in which they're coming back to work or learn in our buildings, in our schools, in our offices. A lot of it will be centered around self-screening for families and students, because not all schools are going to have thermometers. Not all schools will have the capability of doing the screening, so we have to educate our communities how to self-screen. Also our employees for symptoms such as a fever, cough, difficulty breathing, any of those symptoms associated with COVID-19, they should be told to stay at home, to not attend school or work if they are exhibiting any of those symptoms. DHEC is currently working on that exclusion list. There is an exclusion list that DHEC has. COVID-19 currently is not on it, even although some of the symptoms for COVID-19 are on DHEC's exclusion list. I believe they are working to update it. Transportation is the biggest issue we face, I think, as a state right now. DHEC guidelines at the moment, the number of students on a bus should be a maximum of 50% of the standard capacity appropriate for a student's age. Right now, that would mean on a 77 passenger bus, having about 36 students on that bus. Some districts may be able to double up their routes if they have low community spread and have a normal operational day. Other districts, such as the one that I work in, that could not possibly happen. We don't have enough hours in the day, enough buses, or enough drivers to double up on routes to get all of our students to school if we can only have 50% capacity on our buses. We also discussed the liability issue of that, of going against a DHEC recommendation. If a district decides that they want to be fully operational and open and exceed that 50% capacity recommendation by DHEC, we feel the district would be taking on the liability for making that decision. Therefore, they should consult their legal counsel and their liability insurance carrier. Also on transportation, assigned seating with loading from the back to the front. Disinfecting and cleaning should be a minimum of twice daily and more often in high touch areas on the bus. Maximize air ventilation while the bus is in service. Drivers should wear masks, and masks may be worn by students. We discussed the possibility of requiring students to wear masks, but we didn't think it was practical or to expect for a bus driver to have their focus on driving and expect students, and also monitor whether students were wearing masks or not. So obviously it would be optional for students to wear those masks on a bus. Also training for drivers, students, and parents on appropriate safety protocols before they're entering or begin riding that bus. Some operational considerations for school sites. As Alan, I believe, mentioned, designated areas as entrance and exits only. Considered staggered drop-off and pickup times so that you have fewer students arriving at once to enter the building or exit the building. limit the gathering in commons areas, no visitors allowed past the front office capture area, and if it is required or necessary for an IEP meeting or some type of parent conference, those visitors should be screened before they are allowed into any other part of the school building. Decrease the number of transitions for students within buildings, which may mean students stay in the classroom and teachers rotate among those students or some other form of modified schedule. Consider one-way pedestrian patterns within the building where feasible. Frequent disinfecting and cleaning in common areas and high-touch areas. All employees should wear masks when not able to social distance. And students should wear masks when social distancing is not feasible. In terms of food service considerations, alternative meal serving models when social distancing is not feasible in a cafeteria. If you can add more lunch periods during the day to accommodate social distancing, that would be preferred. But if not, then you would have some type of alternative serving model, such as in the classroom. Providing meals to go, if we have a modified schedule, whether that be for half a day or you're alternating days of attendance due to the level of spread of COVID-19 in the community, on the days when those students are not in school, providing meals to go for those students when they're not in attendance for face-to-face instruction. So for the day they're not in school, they will have meals for that day. Frequent disinfecting and cleaning in high-touch areas. And we also want districts to understand when you change these models of food service delivery, it is going to impact the cost, increase the cost of food service with these delivery models. If you're talking about serving meals in the classroom, you're talking about packaging materials, the utensils, the cleaning, all the things that go along with alternative delivery models are going to increase your food service cost with these alternative models. I believe this may be our last slide, was human resource considerations. First and foremost, professional development for all employee groups on proper hygiene and safety protocols. Professional development for all employee groups on trauma-informed practices. As Superintendent Spearman mentioned, we're dealing with the trauma not only of the pandemic, but also of the social justice issues surrounding in our country right now and across the world. So we need all of our professional development, not only dealing with our students and our children, but also our employees, so that when they return, we're able to have that dialogue and bring hopefully some type of healing to these situations when we come back together. Educate employees on leave and guidelines related to COVID-19 and federal guidelines. And the State Department and the state will assist in providing reusable masks for employees. Our report was about 48 pages. I'm not going to read it to you. That is my gift to you today. But I know that it will be put out for comment, and we look forward to having everyone's comments and suggestions to update it.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. And are there any comments from your subcommittee? Members of the task force, Superintendent Spearman?
I just want to make I'm sorry, Superintendent Spearman, I'm sorry. You go ahead.
That's fine, LaToya. I was just going to say thank you to Scott and your team. You are right. The operations piece of this is going to really be a challenge for us. And I hope that the parents and public grandparents who are watching online will assist us, particularly with transportation. There may be, I don't know that we've ever asked parents to instead of using the bus, use their cars. Because we're always pushing and believe that the very safest transportation is for students to ride the bus to school. They're like big old armored trucks almost bringing our children in, but this is a time that we would appreciate parents considering, if at all possible, that they would drive their students to school. That would help us tremendously on the capacity level on the bus. So we need to communicate that to parents as well. But thank you. Great job.
Latoya?
Yes, Dr. Coleman, I just have a summary comment, so to speak, listening to all of the committee's work, and it's just made me think about how COVID-19 has really shined a light on what we already knew in South Carolina. 3 things in particular. 1 is that our state is very diverse. 2 is that teachers are amazing people. Educators are some of the best people in the world, and they are resilient and smart and dedicated and committed. And 3rd is that inequity still persists in our state. And I'm hopeful that going forward, progress is often born out of adversity, that our General Assembly will take a real serious look at base student costs, at revising our education funding formula. I'm afraid that our response to this pandemic will either do 1 or 2 things for us: continue to further the divide between those districts who have and those who do not, our students who have and those who do not, or help us begin to take some serious work in closing the inequity in South Carolina so that every child in our state has an opportunity to meet the profile of a South Carolina graduate. I'm passionate about that, and so I would be remiss if I didn't say that before we finish here today. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Patrick has some comments.
Why do I go after Latoya? Like she just, no, that's fine. I hate going after somebody that should have just been like the end of the conversation. But I said 3 points, and they're general beyond Scott's recommendations. The first one is to reinforce exactly what Latoya said about equity, and that this has laid bare to us the result of a decade plus of underinvestment in public education. You may have noticed my head dipped down at a point or two. I was looking at my phone, and the reason why is because my car's in the shop right now. And I have not done a good job over the last few years investing in preventative maintenance in my car, and it's hammering me today. Well, guess what? We've done the same thing with our schools for the last decade plus, and the bill has come due. And moving out of this pandemic, let's address the immediate need. But if we walk out of this and continue to do the same thing and underfund our schools, to go to Alan's committee's point about, we have a state reg, I believe I heard Alan said, about teacher to counselor ratio, and we're off by like 500 kids. Like that's not something that's sustainable. And we have pieced it together because of the great work of educators. But when the crisis hit, all the tape tore, and we have got to do better moving forward. The second thing is I want to thank Superintendent Spearman for mentioning the injustices at the heart of our national response to the death of George Floyd, because I'm a social studies teacher. That's immediately where my heart goes, and it's why I am so thankful for the work of this task force and local districts to move mountains to give great educational opportunities to our students. Because unfortunately in our society, public schools are one of the few places remaining where we exchange ideas and views and experiences from those that look different. The rest of our society has siloed off into social media and media choices, but schools bring people together to learn collectively. And I am so thankful that we're doing the work necessary to give our kids that opportunity. And then just my final point is, as the public and districts react to this task force's report, I think we would be remiss if we didn't note that regardless of the quality of this report, which I hope is strong and I believe is strong, the report alone does nothing unless we collectively as a state make a commitment to getting our kids back to school that starts now. What we do right now is going to determine whether or not we can open schools in the fall. To go into the governor's press conference yesterday, and what Dr. Bell said around the need for social distancing now and masks now to get in front of this pandemic. We have time right now to be ready for August, but it's going to take a collective effort. And if you care about the students of South Carolina, then you need to listen to public health authorities, because your actions are going to shape what our students can do in the fall. Schools are acknowledged to be an essential part of jumpstarting and reopening our economy. So even if you don't have a kid or a grandkid in South Carolina public schools and you care about our state's economy, then do what you can now, even if you're not an educator, get our kids back to school to help our economy. We have a window and a chance, but will we keep that window open? And that depends on all of us. That requires action from the General Assembly. What worries me the most as a teacher is we know that parents feel pressure to send kids to school when they're sick because parents can't take time off from work. This happens every flu season. This is not surprising. So the General Assembly needs to come in behind the Family First Act that the federal government passed and supplement it to make sure that our families can financially afford to stay home with their sick child. We need businesses to continue to work with us to provide work from home opportunities to their employees so that students that need to engage in distance learning can do so. And we need parents and community organizations to model best practices for your kids right now. I agree wholeheartedly with what Scott said about the challenge of asking a child to put on a mask when they walk onto a school bus. Like, we've been there. We've tried to enforce ID policies in a school. But kids will rise to the occasion when best practices are modeled for them. And if our community organizations and our parents and our families will model best practice right now, it won't seem so novel and disorienting to kids in the fall. So I just issue a challenge beyond the work of this task force that this alone isn't going to get us back to where we want to be. It's going to take the entire state to come along behind. Thanks, Dr. Coleman.
Thank you, Patrick. Excellent points and very, very timely. And I really appreciate your thought, your careful thought, and your passion about the work we're doing, and agree that it is going to take our parents and communities and everyone working together to get our to help our children. Any other comments?
Dr. Coleman, can I make one other comment?
Absolutely.
And this is having been a superintendent for 15 years and working budget, knowing we're in budget season right now, trying to prepare for next year, knowing we're probably not going to have the funding after the CARES funding. I'm speaking to school board members and district leaders as they craft those budgets. When you're working with families, I think you need to be very intentional in terms of trying to make sure you can serve those families. Because if those families feel you're not being flexible in serving them, they're going to choose another option. And when those students are not enrolled in your schools, you're losing that funding while you're continuing to have the personnel costs that you have now. So if your students and families do not feel comfortable returning to your schools, your revenue is going to drop and your expenses are going to remain the same, which means you're going to be put in a difficult situation.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Any other comments?
Dr. Coleman, I just had one I wanted to make in kind of summary, and that is we're looking at education is our mission, obviously, but our schools are so much more than that. And so for the decision makers that will determine if and when schools reopen, we have to remember that our schools are also safe havens for our children, and that it's more than just education, it's nutrition, it's medical services, it's mental health services. There's a lot more that goes on in school other than reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so I think we just need to keep the big picture in mind of the services that schools provide for our students and for our communities.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for making that point. Any other comments?
Dr. Coleman, the one point, and I don't think it's been mentioned today, but certainly we want to be working with those districts that were not able to implement a strong distance learning program on March 16th. And that is going on now. We're working very closely with Education Oversight Committee, who was already working with 15 districts who were in a pilot of e-learning and adding additional districts and setting up different stages of readiness and encouraging those districts to spend some of their CARES Act funding that they're receiving from the U.S. Department of Education on purchasing equipment, training teachers, and getting ready. So that is a piece of work that is happening. I don't know that we mention it in the report. Perhaps we might need to add something on that for those districts that need to really focus in on being prepared for a close down with technology. But Dr. David Mathis and Betsy Carpenter here at the department are working very closely with the committee over at the Education Oversight Committee with those districts to make sure that they're prepared. So I just wanted to mention that, and that could be a paragraph or two that we would need to add to the report.
All right, thank you very much for that comment. Any other comments?
I just think that it's important, you know, as we move forward to make sure that we pay close attention to utilizing our teacher leaders as well and their voices as we get the information out about the recommendations for fall. And I know that Alan mentioned it, I think everybody mentioned it, as far as including teachers on the task force. And I know many districts have created their task force already, but just making sure that we utilize teachers. So not only the social media or the videos to get out information, but also utilizing the voices and the connections that teachers have with families and direct connections that they have with students to communicate, you know, that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that school is safe. And also reiterating the fact that was mentioned in every report about the importance of trauma-informed instruction and social emotional learning, and making sure that we have that support for teachers and students. And it's something, these initiatives aren't just something that we have for this time at COVID, but these are sustainable initiatives that will go on beyond this time period. Thank you all for all the reports, and it's just been amazing participating in this task force.
Thank you, Shonda. Those excellent comments. Any other members of the task force? I want to, again, thank you for your hard work. On next steps, we've got some things we want to, some of the comments today to incorporate. Also, since we have these as sort of three separate subcommittee reports, some of which have some synergies and overlap that we can work together. But it's imperative that we finalize these as soon as we can so that the State Department and our school districts can have some guidance. So I'd like to have a consensus that we work putting this together in a form that we can post probably on Monday so that we can put it in a nice, concise form. And then again, we do want public and stakeholder review. And we would like to probably extend that until, I think, Brian, we talked about maybe Thursday morning. And then again, we would try to meet on Friday for our final review and recommendations so that we can have this information available and have our final recommendations out for our school districts and our state leaders and our stakeholders. If there's any objection to moving forward with this plan, happy to hear those or make notes about it. Again, we will ask our stakeholders to provide input to us so that we can reconvene and approve make our final recommendation. So is there any objection, or I hear a consensus of how we will move forward? All right, I see a lot of heads nodding, so thank you for that. So I'm gonna check in with staff, make sure we're good with that. Superintendent Spearman. All right. That sounds good. Well, that's what we will do. We will certainly I'll let you know as soon as we have that information out to the public, put together in a form, and then we'll look forward to having, as someone already said, input from our stakeholders and the public, and because we do want to make sure that we have a plan that is that we can invest in and certainly provide the best possible scenarios going into the fall. So if there are any other comments, if not, we'll adjourn for the day. And again, thank you so much for your time and effort on working on this project. Thank you.